The knock was polite, almost delicate. I opened the door to see Grayson in a cashmere coat, snowflakes melting against his shoulders, cheeks pink from the cold. He smiled that picture-perfect smile of his and stepped inside, brushing the snow from his sleeves like it was an afterthought. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, setting down a gold-trimmed gift box on top of my fridge. The box stood out like a chandelier in a barn, shiny, unnecessary, and meant to impress. Brought something special from Natalie. He didn't wait for me to unwrap it. Just turned and looked at me, his expression shifting to something more serious. "You're still getting the $5,000 Natalie sends you each month, right? You're comfortable." My fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. I felt something tilt deep and invisible like a picture frame, just slightly askew. I looked at him. Not past him. Not down. Right at him. My voice barely found its way out. "Son, the church is keeping me alive." From the staircase came a sharp, bright laugh. Natalie. Standing just above the landing in a silk-wrapped dress, arms folded, eyes amused. "Well, I guess generosity gets lost in translation," she said, not even trying to hide the smirk. Grayson didn't laugh. I didn't blink. I turned back to the sink, folded the towel in my hands, then unfolded it. The turkey was still roasting in the oven, the timer a steady tick in the silence. "I'm fine," I said, smoothing the towel again. "There's coffee if either of you want some." Grayson hesitated, then walked to the window staring out at the driveway like he'd rather be anywhere else. Natalie descended the stairs slowly, her heels tapping on the floor I'd scrubbed clean just that morning. The smell of cloves and roasted garlic filled the air, but it did nothing to soothe the hollow spreading through my chest. My stomach growled quietly, but it wasn't for food. I opened the fridge. A head of lettuce, a jar of mustard, half a carton of milk. The gold box glittered above me like a crown no one earned. And later that afternoon, I walked to the bank. The front door clicked shut with a softness that didn't match the weight in my chest. Grayson and Natalie were gone. The gold box still sat untouched, cold, and gleaming on top of the fridge. I didn't finish the turkey. Instead, I pulled on my coat, the thick one, with the lining that had started to fray at the sleeves, and walked the 8 blocks to the Oregon Valley Credit Union. The air bit through the wool and whispered against my collarbone. My boots left neat, single prints in the frost. Inside the bank was too warm. A fake pine garland wrapped the service counter, and someone had hung silver bells from the fluorescent light. The young teller smiled without really looking. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" I took a breath. "I need to check for incoming transfers. From my son, Grayson Holt. He said he's been sending money, monthly." She nodded, tapping on the keyboard. Her nails were red, glossy. Holiday ready. Her eyes scanned the screen. Silence. Then a small furrow between her brows. "I see some interest, earned about $110 for the year," she said quietly. "But no other incoming deposits. Not for the last 12 months at least." My breath didn't catch. My heart didn't leap. Just a quiet click inside, like the final turn of a deadbolt. "Thank you," I said. "Would you like me to double-check the name?" "No need." I adjusted my gloves and stepped back into the cold. The wind had picked up, tugging at my scarf, turning my cheeks raw. I didn't rush home. The sky had dulled into that iron color it takes before snowfall. Lights blinked in windows. Cars passed full of music and laughter that didn't belong to me. At home, I peeled off my gloves, set them on the radiator, and lit a candle beside August's photo. He looked out from the frame like he always had. Stoic, strong-jawed eyes, soft at the corners. "We raised him better," I murmured. The flame flickered, once then held. Later, I opened the notebook I hadn't touched in years and wrote a name at the top. The notebook was buried beneath old recipe clippings and a takeout menu I hadn't touched since August died. It smelled faintly of cloves and drawer wood. The spine was cracked, the corners softened by time and hands that had once believed in tracking every penny. I laid it open on the table, flipping past years of careful notes. March, $42 gas, $19 arthritis cream. April, $28.75 groceries. Food pantry closed early. May, $11 hair trim. Canceled birthday cake order. Every page told the same story. Small numbers. Quiet decisions. Nothing loud, nothing extravagant. Certainly not $5,000. Not once. I turned to a blank page and pressed my pen to the paper. January. Find out where the money went. Do not accuse. Watch. I didn't write more. I didn't need to. The plan was simple. I would not cry. I would not confront. But I would not be lied to in my own kitchen again. That Sunday, I walked to the early service. The cold pinched, but the church was warm and smelled of lemon oil and coffee. Reverend Cale asked if I wanted to stay after the sermon. I said yes. When the last hymn faded, he placed a hand on my shoulder and pressed a paper bag into my palms. Extra rolls, he said gently. And there's cranberry spread. I nodded, unsure how to smile without breaking something inside. At home, I placed the rolls in the freezer one by one, wrapping them in foil like they were precious. Later, I opened my phone, something I only did to check the weather or read the local bulletin board. But today, I made the mistake of opening Natalie's page. A photo, glossy and bright, filled the screen. She stood next to a chrome and glass contraption in a tiled room. The caption read, "New Year, New Me. Grateful for my at-home sauna wellness first." The comments were full of hearts and flame emojis. I closed the app. One of us clipped soup coupons. The other clipped ribbon off luxury packaging. I made another note in the logbook, "Do not confuse calm for weakness." Then I walked to the library. The tires crunched over ice just past noon. I peeked through the curtain and saw a white SUV gleaming in the sun, parked crooked across my driveway. New, spotless, and still wearing dealership tags. Natalie stepped out in heels, too fine for January, holding a bouquet of lavender, like she'd plucked it from a spa catalog. She didn't knock, just opened the door and breezed in. "Mother," she said, voice warm and weightless. "You've been on my mind. Brought you something soothing. Stress isn't good for your memory, you know." I took the lavender gently and set it on the counter. My memory's clear enough to remember what never arrived. Her eyes twitched. Not her smile, just the eyes. "I'm sure there's been a mix-up," she said quickly, placing her purse down like she owned the room. "You know how these things go, bank delays, technical issues. Don't worry. We've been sending it." I didn't offer her tea. She shifted, smoothing her coat. "You should rest more, Mother. At your age, things can get confusing." "Do I seem confused?" She looked at the floor, then back up with that perfect smile that never quite reached her. "I'll double-check with Grayson. I'm sure it's just a clerical error." She didn't stay long. After the door shut behind her, I stood for a while, still holding the scent of lavender on my fingertips. Then I sat at the kitchen table and opened the notebook. John 19. She lied. Again. I let the ink dry before folding the notebook shut. Later that evening, I opened my email. I hadn't written to her in years, not since she moved away to care for her sister. But I remembered the stories she used to tell at women's circle meetings. About forged signatures, redirected pensions, families that wore kindness like a costume. Subject: Need to speak to Mrs. Lang. Message: You once worked in elder fraud. I believe something is happening. Could we talk? I clicked. Send. Then I placed the lavender in a mason jar, and I waited for Mrs. Lang's reply. He arrived in a gray sedan that didn't belong on my street, dressed in a charcoal coat tie, neat expression unreadable. I opened the door with my apron still on flour on my hands, from baking just to pass the time. He extended his hand. "Mrs. Doss?" "I'm Alden." "Mrs. Lang said I should come." I nodded and stepped aside. He didn't take off his coat, just moved straight to the kitchen table and opened a leather folder with the kind of care men usually give wedding rings or military medals. "These are internal records from your son's firm," he said quietly. 8 wire transfers, $5,000 each, all marked for you. He slid the first page across. I read the numbers twice. Then I looked at the routing number. "That's not my bank," I said. "I know," he replied. "This account was opened last spring. You're listed as the primary recipient, but the paperwork shows someone forged your signature." He didn't have to say her name. It was printed in black and white. Co-owner Natalie Doss. He gave me a moment. Then he pushed another stack forward. "This is from the company's credit card. Receipts. Jewelry boutiques in Manhattan. A 5-day spa retreat in Sedona. Silk robes from a place that didn't list prices, only phone numbers to inquire." "She listed everything as travel expenses tied to your son's speaking engagements," Alden said. I didn't reply. I turned each page slowly, laying them out like cards in a quiet losing game. When we finished, he asked if I wanted copies. I told him I'd make them myself. My old brother machine still worked. Every beep of that copier felt like stitching a wound closed. I placed the stack gently in a worn tin box next to my ledger. Beside the record of canned soup gas bills and store coupons now sat proof of something much colder. "This is bigger than my pantry going empty," I whispered. Mr. Alden didn't argue. He only nodded and said, "I'll wait to hear from you." He let himself out, and I sat there, watching the winter light bend across the floor. The table was dressed in simple white linen. I'd lit the good candles, the ones I used to bring out for Frank's birthday. Chicken roasted slow with rosemary and garlic. Cornbread, warm butter, already soft. I arranged the beets just the way Grayson liked them, as a boy roasted, until their sweetness turned to earth. At 6:30 sharp, the bell rang. It was only Natalie. She stepped in with a bottle of wine and a carefully rehearsed smile. "Grayson's delayed," she said, brushing snow from her coat. "He sends his love." I nodded and led her to the table. She complimented the centerpiece, commented on the weather, asked about the church choir, all surface, all shine. I matched her tone, pleasant and unbothered, refilling her glass twice without letting mine go empty. We ate in silence for a stretch. She commented on the chicken. "So moist," she said. "You must tell me your secret." I smiled. "Time," I said. "Time and watching carefully." She laughed lightly, then reached for more wine. I watched the candlelight catch on her bracelet. Gold twisted into some modern shape, likely from one of the receipts I'd copied 2 weeks ago. Halfway through dessert, I set my fork down. "I just wanted to thank you for the February transfer," I said, voice steady. "It helped me fix the furnace." She blinked once, then recovered. "Of course, dear. As always, on the 10th. The front door opened mid-sentence. Grayson walked in snow, dusting his collar hair damp from the cold. He stopped, his briefcase still in hand. "No," he said almost too softly. "I set it for the 15th. The room shifted. Natalie's hand trembled just slightly as she reached for her glass. "Oh, did you?" she said too brightly. "I must have gotten it mixed up." Grayson stared at her, the confusion already catching in his eyes. I didn't speak. I simply folded my napkin and placed it gently beside my plate. I sent the email to Alden and copied Tilda Quinn. The subject line was short Sunday dinner. "One last thing." Tilda wrote back within an hour. "I'll make sure the language in the documents is clear. Enough to be understood, but undeniable." Alden added, "He needs to see it himself. We'll let the numbers do the talking." I reached out to Pastor Reed next. Told him I'd made stew cornbread the works. Would he mind dropping off the donation summaries from St. Jude's while he was in the area? He didn't ask questions. Just said, "Of course, Alverna. I'll be there right after the last service." That Sunday, I wore gray slacks and a soft blouse. I set the table for 4. Beef stew simmered gently. The cornbread was fresh. I'd bought romaine for the salad. A beige envelope rested between the salt shaker and the water pitcher, neatly labeled in blue ink St. Jude Fund. Grayson arrived just before 6. No Natalie this time. His eyes looked tired. "Everything smells good, Mom," he said, bending to kiss my cheek. We'd just sat down when Pastor Reed arrived, carrying the envelope. "Sorry I'm late," he said, setting it down in front of me. I thanked him and nodded toward the seat across from Grayson. "Stay a moment. Share a plate." He smiled and pulled out a chair. Natalie showed up 10 minutes later. "Apologies," she said, breezing in like nothing was wrong. "Traffic." We ate. The conversation skimmed light topics until I reached for the envelope. "Pastor brought over donation records," I said, calmly. I thought Grayson might want to take a look. Grayson reached for the envelope and slid out the pages. His eyes moved over the headers, account numbers, amounts, dates, signatories. His jaw tightened. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Natalie leaned over too quickly. "That's not what it looks like. That's probably a clerical error," a voice interrupted. "No," Mrs. Doss Alden said from the archway. "Nothing was accidental." Natalie turned paling. Hugh Grayson's hands were shaking now. His eyes hadn't moved from the page. The courthouse smelled like old carpet and worry. I sat between Tilda and Alden, hands folded, heart steady. Across the aisle, Natalie wore a severe black suit. Her hair was pulled tight, her face blank. Grayson sat behind her, slouched, his eyes fixed on the floor. He hadn't returned my calls since the dinner. I didn't blame him. The judge entered. The clerk called the case. And just like that, our private wounds were public. Tilda stood. She spoke plainly without theatrics. Presented the forged bank documents. The transfers marked for me but funneled to an account I'd never seen. Natalie's name as co-owner. Then the business card expenses, spa packages, jewelry designer, shoes. All paid for with corporate funds tied to Grayson's company. Natalie's lawyer leaned into sympathy. He called me elderly 3 times in one paragraph, suggested I'd gotten confused or perhaps had misplaced a few facts. When he implied memory loss, Tilda only smiled. "Your Honor," she said, lifting my notebook. "If this is memory loss, it's the most organized case I've ever seen." She read aloud each visit, each denial, each exact date the money failed to arrive. The courtroom was quiet but heavy. Then Alden was called to the stand. He answered every question calmly, showed the signed documents my name forged, pointed out how the signature curved differently than mine, how the slant was wrong, explained the accounting audit trail. Clear, methodical. Grayson finally looked up. He didn't say a word. But his face said everything. Years of belief cracking in a single moment. The judge reviewed the documents. Then the verdict: guilty. Elder financial exploitation. Corporate fraud. Full repayment to be made. Immediate revocation of financial authority. Judgment entered. Natalie let out a breathless protest, but the gavel already fell. As the bailiff led her away from the bench, she turned desperate, eyes shining. "Grayson, please." He looked at her, then slowly, silently turned his head away. And just like that, the lie that had lived in our family for years came undone. The check arrived in a plain envelope, the kind used for utility bills. No apology, no note, just numbers printed on thin paper. $40,000. Money meant to keep me warm, fed safe. Money that had vanished into someone else's comfort. I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment before sliding it into the drawer beneath my ledger. I didn't think about trading in my old sedan. I didn't picture new countertops or a gleaming stove. The house had held me through lean years. I didn't need it to shine. I needed it to stay standing. The next Sunday after service, I stopped Pastor Reed in the hallway. "I've been thinking," I said. "There are others like me. People who would never say a word until it's far too late." By Wednesday, the church bulletin carried a small notice: Senior Assistance and Advocacy Fund. At first, the donations were modest. A woman slipped me $5 in an envelope. A man handed me coins wrapped in a paper towel. A retired teacher offered her time instead of money, saying she'd take calls from anyone too nervous to speak to a lawyer. It grew slowly, quietly. That felt right. Grayson didn't call. Weeks passed, then stretched into months. I tried not to look at the phone too often. The house stayed quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ribs. I told myself he needed time, space, understanding. But the ache didn't care about logic. In late spring, I bought a simple birthday card. Blue balloons, nothing sentimental. I wrote his name, nothing else. No return address. I mailed it and didn't wait by the window. The days turned warm. The garden woke. Life didn't pause. Every Sunday, I cooked enough for two. I set out the extra plate without ceremony. Not hope either, just habit. Just love's last stubborn form. One afternoon, as I folded napkins for the coming week, I heard a single car turn onto my street. Then slow. Then stop. The knock came just before 10. The rain had been falling steady since dinner, tapping on the windows, like a memory I couldn't quite name. I opened the door to find Grayson standing there, soaked to the bone water, running from his collar, eyes red. I didn't know he said. His voice cracked at the edges. I didn't see it. I should have. I didn't speak, just stepped back and held the door. He peeled off his coat slowly, like it weighed more than it used to. I fetched a towel and left it on the arm of the chair. We didn't hug. Not yet. He sat by the fire staring into it like the flames could offer a different version of the past. Minutes passed. Then he spoke again, voice low. She left. Took everything. Savings car, even the ring. Everything except the guilt. I stirred the pot on the stove without a word and handed him a bowl. Beef stew, warm and quiet. He took it with shaking hands, the kind of shaking that doesn't come from the cold. I was so sure I was protecting everyone, he whispered. Turns out I didn't even see what I should have been looking at. We didn't try to fix it. Just sat with it. Later, he stood wiping his hands on a napkin. I saw the post about the fund. Can I help with the paperwork or calls or anything? I want to. I nodded once. He moved toward the donation table, the one tucked by the bookshelf, and started quietly organizing forms, alphabetizing, restacking envelopes, rewriting names with more care than I'd seen in years. His hair was still damp. His shoulders hunched with something heavier than failure recognition. And as I watched him, that quiet boy who used to bring me dandelions in his pockets, I saw him again. Still in there. Just buried for a while. The rain slowed, tapping softer now. In the other room, the phone rang. Not loud, but enough to call both of us out of the silence.